morning. Like most of our attendees at home, so we'll get started then. Thank you all for joining us today for our annual webinar, State of the Spend Out. My name is Erin Malone. I'm filling in for Zainab Mohammed, Kataly's Communications Director, who's currently out on leave. And today we'll delve into how Kataly is adapting to the evolving political landscape and what our grant making and investments revealed in 2024. Before we dive in, we'd love to get to know each of you a bit better. As you see on the screen, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat by sharing your name, your pronouns, and the organization you represent. And additionally, if you need captions, please turn on that feature in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We are using auto captions, so we just apologize for any inaccuracy that they may output. And now it's my pleasure to turn over the floor to Amaka Agbo, the CEO of Kataly Foundation and the Managing Director of the Restorative Economies Fund, to kick off our discussion.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Erin. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to welcome you all to Kataly's annual State of the Spend Out webinar. My name is Nwamaka Agbo, and I use the pronouns she and her, and I'm honored to work alongside the outstanding Kataly team as the CEO of the foundation and the Managing Director of our Restorative Economies Fund. The annual State of the Spend Out webinar is an opportunity for us to give all of you, our peers in philanthropy, our partners, our grantees, an update on how our work is progressing towards our mission to redistribute all of our assets to support Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities and all communities of color. As a bit of context, we've opted for a webinar format as it allows us to directly engage with all of you in real time. We recognize and see that our work in philanthropy is both dynamic. And this is because we are all navigating shifting conditions both in the world that then shape how we do our work, which means that from one day to the next, we're recognizing that we need to be nuanced in how we respond to the unique circumstances we encounter. So we opted for a format that allows us to reflect on our successes and highlights, one that allows us to be open and honest about our learning edges, our shifts in perspectives about our work, and one that also reflects the energy and dynamism of the work. We felt that it was hard to capture this in a written report, which we knew that few would read. And so we really welcome all of you to engage with us in the chat box as we go through sharing our content with all of you. In this moment, our team felt that it was really important for us to reground everyone that follows the work of Kataly in why we are Spend Out Foundation. In this moment, a moment that is shaped by a lot of confusion and frustration, it can feel a little contradictory to have a foundation like ours that's decided to spend out our resources in this moment. And so we wanted to really unpack why we've continued to stay on our mission as a Spend Out Foundation. Some of you might know the saying that constraints beget creativity. And when Kataly was established in 2019 with the mission to spend out in 10 to 15 years, we knew that the time-limited nature of our work would require us to be highly creative in how we would approach our grant making. And we saw this challenge as an opportunity to live into our values of regeneration, healing, interdependence, accountability, and experimentation. All of these values guide our work at the foundation. And so we're not here to use this webinar as a forum to debate the merits of being a foundation that exists into perpetuity or one that decides to spend out. Instead, we're more interested in engaging in a conversation about how all of us in philanthropy, both institutional foundations, but also donors and investors, can be honest and clear about how we live our values throughout all elements of our work. And so for us, this is one of the reasons it's really clear for us to lift up why we're a Spend Out Foundation. For Kataly, redistributing our assets is ultimately about redistributing power. We believe that when Black, Indigenous, and all communities of color have access to the essential resources, then they'll have access to the power to build self-determined livelihoods for themselves, their loved ones, and their communities. Power ultimately is the ability to have true, real choices about the well-being of your life and how you want to move on a day-to-day basis. And then ensuring that you have the resources to implement and carry out those choices. So rather than keeping our assets within the accounts of our own foundation and ultimately continuing to consolidate power within our institution, we want to really focus in on redistributing our resources and power out into communities and grantee partners so that they then have the resources that they need and the power that they need to really advocate and build the lives that they want for themselves. This is another reason why we refer to ourselves as a spend out foundation instead of spending down. We are intentional about moving our resources out into communities to ensure that they can steward and control the resources that we know will ultimately continue to regenerate and circulate in a way that builds shared prosperity and well-being for many and not just the few. We don't see our nature as a spin up foundation as one that's creating a vacuum once we actually conclude our work. Rather, we're looking to the work of our grantees, the organizations and initiatives that we support as the ways that we'll continue to see this work grow and prosper. We believe that we need to be building beyond and outside of any one institution in this moment. And so that's why we're committed to moving our resources out into grassroots communities so that they can continue to build this work in real time out in the world. Being a spend out also allows us to decenter ourselves out of the conversation as a foundation. We acknowledge that resources should not be consolidated and held within the control of one institution, but that they're meant to be distributed out across communities to build shared prosperity. And being a spin out foundation is what allows us to move resources at scale, frequency, and with the swiftness that's required to confront the harm that we know Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities continue to experience and are at the front lines of experiencing right now in this moment. And so we want to ensure that we are doing our very best to put our partners on a pathway towards self-determination, towards building the vision and future that they have. So for these reasons, again, that's why Kataly is a spend out foundation. We recognize that all the problems of the world won't be solved through the nonprofit industrial complex. And so we'd rather focus our conversation in on moving our resources and assets out to our grantee partners. So to kick us off with our content today, I'd like to invite our grants officer, Danielle Royston Lopez, to start us off. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amaka, and thank you everyone for joining us today for Kataly's State of the Spend Out. My name is Danielle Royston Lopez. I use she and they pronouns, and I am grants officer here at Kataly. It is a pleasure to be with you all today. So part of the purpose of this webinar is to practice a core value of Kataly, which is transparency around our grant making. So I'm going to take a few minutes to give an overview of Kataly's grant making, focusing first on the grant making that we've done to date, and then really diving in on 2024. So as you will see here, as we've shared before, Kataly was created with an initial investment of $445 million in assets from Regan Pritzker and Chris Allen. Now, last year at our State of the Spend Out webinar, we shared that we were about halfway through our spend out, and we expect to complete our grant making and investments by 2028. So to date, we have distributed approximately $255 million, and an additional $286 million has been pledged to be redistributed over the next few years. You can also see on this slide that through the life of Kataly, we've had the pleasure of partnering with 529 grantee partners, 300 of whom are currently active with us. And 51 of our grant partners have been co-funded across multiple program areas. Now, while co-funding is something that actually happens pretty organically at Kataly, we wanted to take the time to highlight instances where our programs teams have intentionally coordinated efforts and resources to move creative funding to grantee partners in a very collaborative way. So there are 51 instances that we have counted to date. When the foundation first started, our three program areas were fairly distinct from each other, but as our strategies have continued to evolve, there has been much greater overlap in our grant making priorities, making these co-funding efforts possible, and also really weaving together some threads of Kataly's grant making practice. We're proud to share that the Kataly team has been focused on land-based work, healing justice, and the intersections of movement organizing and infrastructure all across our three program areas. Now I would like to get into the details of 2024, which we'll see on the next slide. So in 2024, we redistributed approximately $57 million, making 228 grants. We redistributed $2.8 million in rapid response grant making, which represents a $1 million increase in our rapid response work from 2023. A few of the initiatives that were included in our rapid response efforts last year were social movement defense, so really safety and security for our organizations and community leaders, also climate disaster relief, specifically following the hurricanes Helene and Milton, and a continuation of US-based Jewish and Arab organizing for land and liberation in solidarity with Palestine, building on land and liberation grant making that we had made in 2023. Additionally, $16.9 million went towards land-based projects, and we funded 57 land-based projects in 2024. Some of the details of what a land-based project is like includes land being taken out of the speculative market and preserved for the public good, like access to reliable and affordable housing, land being stewarded to implement climate justice strategies that include food sovereignty campaigns or safety and security shelters for when climate disasters do occur, as they are occurring more quickly or more frequently. Land being stewarded as a site of communities to have safe and sacred spaces to gather for collective healing strategies, ceremony, cultural practices, and ultimately land being respected as a community wealth building asset, not to have its value extracted from, but to be in relationship with for the benefit of all people. So I'd like to share a little bit more about the types of support that Kataly was able to provide to our grantee partners in 2024 on the next slide. You'll see that 50% of our grant making was for general operating support, 20% for capital campaign support, 10% for project specific support, and another 10% for rapid response support. At our last State of the Spend Out webinar, we spoke about this breakdown in greater detail, recognizing within philanthropy that unrestricted general operating funds are ideal for supporting organizations because it maximizes the flexibility in how organizations can use funds. We know this is even more important right now, given the financial and political contexts organizations are navigating currently. Now, the reason that our general operating support percentage is just 50% is because we do often receive specific requests from grantee partners to support particular projects, for example, land-based projects. And I don't want to discount this point here, but project-specific grant making can actually be an incredible leverage for grantee partners. Let's say when they are doing a capital campaign, if they have dollars coming in that are marked for that campaign, they can use that commitment to leverage commitment from other funders. And so it's a really powerful point of agency that our grantee partners have to invite us into funding them in the ways that they most need and when they most need them. So this is an overview of our grant making to date and in 2024, and I'm very excited to hand the virtual mic off to Iris Garcia, my dear colleague, from the Mindfulness and Healing Justice program.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Hi, all. My name is Iris Carmelita Garcia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the program officer of the Mindfulness and Healing Justice program here at Kataly. And let me give you an overview of our 2024 grant making. So the total amount that has been redistributed in grant payments to date since the inception of the program is 48.3 million. And about 2/3 of that is kind of represents our whole fund. So we are 2/3 through our redistribution effort. In 2024, $6.1 million were redistributed, and this includes payments on previously awarded multi-year grants. Of the grants awarded in 2024, about 2/3 were multi-year grants, and 1/4 of the grants were to land-based projects. And yeah, the total number of grant partners since the Mindfulness and Healing Justice program's inception is 124, and about 70 of those we would consider to be active grant partners. On the next slide, I would love to share a grantee partner highlight from 2024. So Maui Medics Healers Hui emerged from Mauna Medics Healers Hui. These was a group of Hawaiian healing practitioners that spent 8 months on Mauna Kea tending to the Sacred Land Defenders encampment. And in August of 2023, Maui Medics Healers Hui mobilized in response to the Lahaina fires to create spaces for healing and to build communities of care during times of trauma. Since the fire, the hui of practitioners and healthcare providers have consistently provided free care to Lahaina residents and those impacted by the fire. And this care really centers traditional Kanaka Maoli or Native Hawaiian modalities like Lomi Lomi body work and talk story, as well as Eastern modalities like acupuncture and Western treatments like hyperbaric medicine. And in addition to these free community wellness centers, Maui Medics Healers Hui offers healing justice trainings and manuals for practitioners to really nourish community accountability and to build solidarity. So back in August 2023, Kataly engaged in rapid response grant making for the Maui fire recovery. And we redistributed $650,000 to 9 organizations that were identified in collaboration with the environmental justice resource and collective leaders. And so after, initial rapid response efforts and when funder attention to a crisis starts to die down, the Mindfulness and Healing Justice program often looks to determine if there are opportunities for longer-term funding of healing justice or collective care. So 6 months after the Lahaina fire, our team reached out to Maui Medics Healers Hui and provided a 3-year multi-year general operating support grant. And our intention is really to support Maui Medics Healers Hui to focus on building towards long-term infrastructure for Indigenous-led communities of care outside of crisis. And as it relates to recovery and rebuilding from the Lahaina fire, Maui Medics Healers Hui envisions processes to support Aina back or land back, Indigenous sovereignty, and the restoration and reclamation of what settler colonialism has attempted to destroy in the Kingdom of Hawaii. So I am going to now pass it over to Lena to share a little bit about the Restorative's Economies Fund.
Lena, I think you're muted.
Whoops. Hi, everyone. I am Lena Shalabi. I go by she, her pronouns, and I am the program officer of the Restorative Economies Fund at the Kataly Foundation. Um, Also known as REF. We seek to provide non-extractive financial and non-financial resources to support community-owned and community-governed projects across the capital spectrum. And this fund is based on the Restorative Economics Framework, which was designed by our very own Amaka Agbo. We support a number of projects in REF, including equitable economic development projects, which can be seen in grantee partners such as Historic Claiborne Temple in Memphis, as well as Restore Oakland. We also support land and housing stabilization, which can be seen in projects like Kensington Corridor Trust in Philadelphia and the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative in Oakland. We're also supporting community government loan funds, which include Pot Liquor Capital, Black Farmer Fund, and Runway. and built environment infrastructure projects, which are community-owned microgrids and community-owned internet projects. One example can be seen in People Power Solar Cooperative. And lastly, we have the honor of supporting land remediation projects or land-backed projects. Oftentimes these are co-funded with our MHJ and ERC programs. As you can see on this slide, we have redistributed over $154 million in grants since our inception. And this number does not include the approximate $40 million in investments that we have made. These are non-extractive patient loans, which we're lucky to have our Chief Investment Officer, Lynn Hoy, and our newest member of our team, Hans Hao, lead us through. Zooming into 2024, you can see that we've redistributed over $33 million in grants. These include both new grants as well as our multi-year general operating grants, and has brought us to 242 grantees since our inception. About a third of which I would say are active grantees. Next slide. So yeah, picking a grantee was difficult because we work with so many amazing grantee partners, but we have the honor of introducing Coalición Fortaleza to you all today. The co-founders of Coalición Fortaleza grew up in Ashland, Oregon, and they came together after the 2020 Alameda fires, which destroyed over 2,800 structures in that community, including the Talent Mobile Home Estate, where many of their friends and family members lived. 2 months after the fire, the Talent community came together to assess the damage, and of the 100 homes, only 10 had survived. These homes housed many low-income Latinx families, the majority of whom worked as seasonal agricultural workers. And at this time of observation, one of the elders asked, "What if we just bought our neighborhood back?" This comment inspired the co-founders to research ways to make this question a reality, and so began Coalición Fortaleza, which means strong coalition. I'm going to use their beautiful description to give an overview. Coalición Fortaleza is a culturally empowered, women of color-led, community-based organization grounded in fierce love for the Latinx and Indigenous communities of the Rogue Valley. One of their mottos is "No solutions about us without us." When my colleague Jocelyn and I were introduced to Coalición Fortaleza in late 2022, they had already purchased the land for their new site of the Talent Mobile Home Estate. They had already started hosting several gatherings, inviting community members to take part in the visioning and design of the new estate, and residents were already involved in the creating of community bylaws and selecting a board of directors. So REF came together and offered a 5-year unrestricted general operating grant to support the organization in the growth for their team and to support their work. Last year in October, as you can see in the pictures, Coalición celebrated the opening of South Oregon's first community-owned mobile home estate with a land blessing, marking the completion of the park's rebuild after the devastating 2020 fires. Families began moving into their new homes, including the 23 of the original 100 families who now are co-owners of the land that they reside on. This achievement is about more than just providing affordable housing. It's about reclaiming dignity, the restoration of their community, and a step forward in their ongoing recovery. The victory of Talent Mobile Home Estate has already sparked a movement across Southern Oregon, and 2 additional mobile home parks are expected to become resident-owned communities this year. Coalición has many other projects they oversee, including El Mercadito, a physical and online marketplace which empowers local Latinx and BIPOC entrepreneurs in strengthening the region's local economy. And they also support Camino Colibri, which is an affordable housing development for community members who are legally excluded from home ownership in the United States. We have so many amazing grantee partners, so choosing one to highlight was not easy. But with the devastation of the LA fires fresh on our minds, we chose to highlight this wonderful organization who came together around a time of tragedy to design the future they wanted. This organization embodies the community-owned and community-governed projects that REF looks for and is a true inspiration for me and my team. And with that, I'll pass it to Michelle.
Thanks, Lena. Hi, everyone. It's so beautiful to see so many of you here. Such amazing organizations listed in the chat. Just want to lift that up. So I'm Michelle Mascareñas, Senior Program Officer of the Environmental Justice Resourcing Collective, or EJRC. I'm joining you here from Huchin, Chochenyo, speaking Lisjan Ohlone lands. And I use she or they pronouns. The EJRC is a collective of 9 women of color movement leaders who came together through their webs of relationship to identify the core strategies as well as the organizations to support through this environmental justice grant-making program of Kataly. The core priority areas that EJRC supports are building power, collective healing, and land and infrastructure. You'll hear a lot of these themes throughout our programs, right? And this year, we are going to be redistributing over $14 million on top of the nearly $45 million to date, bringing us ever closer to what we anticipate will be about $75 million redistributed by spend out at the end of 2028. We have 138 grantee partners since inception. Next slide, please. And like Lena and Iris said, it's so hard to choose just one of the more than 100 current grantees to help illustrate the power of these groups as they're all doing such incredibly groundbreaking and game-changing work. But the Farm Worker Association of Florida is the one I get the honor of lifting up today. Their mission is to build power among farm worker and rural low-income communities in Florida in order to respond to and gain control over the issues that impact farm workers' lives. FWAF is a statewide organization with 5 offices that were established when time and time again disasters impacting farm workers struck, and the organization organized in response. They organize their members at the complex intersection of land use, food, migration, health, worker, and environmental justice. And local leadership committees made up of farm workers steer the work of the organization at the local level and also at the statewide level. Meanwhile, they're nurturing community gardens and agroecology initiatives that are building towards their vision of farm worker and community well-being. In these times, support for organizations building immigrant worker and other BIPOC community power in rural regions in the South, Midwest, Appalachia, and Native lands to shift the conditions and the political landscape is more critical than ever. Next slide, please. And support for Farm Workers Association of Florida is a good illustration, kind of reflects EJRC's grant-making strategy. We are in the spend out phase or phase 2 of the EJRC grant making. And the backbone of that grant making is multi-year general operating support. And then in phase 2, EJRC added nearly $9 million in one-time grants to land-based initiatives that were distributed last year. Like the one-time grant for land-based work that was granted to FWAF, many of these grants were to grantees who also have received or continue to receive general support from Kataly, recognizing that land stewardship goes hand in hand with ongoing power building and collective healing work. And then going forward, we're going to be developing capacity building opportunities and strategies for language justice, as well as to address the need to care for our leaders through sabbaticals and elder care. Working with the rest of the Kataly team, the 9 women of color leaders from the field who identified these critical areas to invest in are providing key leadership to the field of philanthropy, because the EJRC really shows what is possible when funders take the direction of movements who have their finger on the pulse of what's needed. In this final phase of the EJRC, we're focused on supporting the incredible organizations in our portfolio and continuing to build power, cultivate collective healing, and steward land-based initiatives. And we look forward to connecting with funders, movement groups, and individual donors who want to invest in this critical grassroots movement infrastructure in these times. Thanks, and I'll pass it over to Jocelyn.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Hello, everyone. My name is Jocelyn Wong, and it's my privilege to serve as the Director of Capacity Building at Kataly. We've had some really exciting developments in 2024 as it relates to capacity building. Some of you may recall that I was previously in a dual role, also serving as an analyst with the Restorative Economies Fund. Last spring, I transitioned out of that dual role and now serve full-time as Kataly's Director of Capacity Building. Also, in the fall of last year, we welcomed Lindsay Moriguchi-Wong, who serves as the Program Officer for Capacity Building. I couldn't be more grateful to have Lindsay on board. These staffing investments come at a pivotal moment in Kataly's lifetime. With our grant making coming to a close in 2028, some of our grantees have already received or will soon receive notice of their final multi-year grant commitments. And while we all knew this moment would come, we don't take this transition and the impacts it will have on our grantee partners lightly. Thus, in addition to staffing up, we are increasing funding for programming and infrastructure partnerships going forward to accompany our partners building capacity to protect and care for one another, to surface and share the tools and resources of our ancestors, our planet, and of our movements past, and to boldly continue the work of building the new and next. We redistributed just over $1 million in 2024. We expect to triple that figure in 2025. Next slide, please. On this slide, we share a breakdown of how resources were redistributed over key capacity building areas, including resource mobilization and diversification, technical support for land-based projects, building the muscles to collectively govern and to experience conflict as a generative force, and finally, building narrative power and operational strength. Across all of these areas, we also maintain an emphasis on grantees who are actively experiencing and preparing to navigate greater degrees of instability and transition. Next slide, please. This winter, we worked with Morgan Finley and Jasmine Nelson at Raise for Good to build an impact measurement and evaluation framework for Kataly's capacity building work. I'll take a moment here to thank Morgan, Jasmine, the Raise for Good team, and all of our partners who participated in this project, because what this work really amounts to is a tremendous gift to us. It is essentially a roadmap for how we maintain a stance of learning and accountability in our capacity building work going forward. Among other things, this process helped us to clearly articulate what it is that we do. So here we have that. We connect our grantee partners to external providers and opportunities for learning and development at low or no cost. We support movement-driven infrastructure development projects, and we directly and indirectly create spaces for grantee network development. Next slide, please. The impact measurement and evaluation project involved focus groups, one-on-one interviews, and surveys with grantees and capacity building partners, which I'll note occurred both before and after the election in November. We plan to do a capacity building focused webinar in the fall to report back the wealth of information there is to share from this process. But for now, I wanted to lift up some of what we heard as it relates to what stands in the way of organizational stability for our grantee partners. This is unlikely to come as a surprise to many of you, but nonetheless, I think it's important to highlight some of the specifics of what we heard from folks, which largely fell into these three categories. With regards to financial instability, folks named the challenges of short-term funding cycles, lack of support for core operational needs, and high levels of competition for resources. Of course, we've known that leadership transitions can be incredibly destabilizing. Participants named lack of succession planning, burnout, and trauma endured by staff and community members as serious concerns. Last but certainly not least, we have external pressures. Some of the concerns here included fear of litigation or loss of funding coming as a result of doing race-explicit work, taking values-based positions, or targeting powerful forces of injustice. For example, Palestinian solidarity work, environmental justice campaigns targeting fossil fuel industry, etc. Philanthropy was also implicated here, often caving to political pressures and pulling away from spaces when what's actually needed most is deeper levels of solidarity and support. Next slide, please. As we look ahead, we're keenly aware of the political climate and what it means in terms of escalating threats and attacks facing our grantee partners and communities, and how that is actually pulling leaders away from a focus on longer-term stability. What we also know is that the North Star remains the same. What we do to survive this time must also be in service of what we are building for the future. It's truly a time of both and. So we will continue to accompany our grantee partners towards resource abundance, self-determination, and land-based healing as a means for security and liberation. We will make available programming, resources, and connections to values-aligned technical assistance providers to defend and mitigate external pressures and threats. We will invest in strengthening operational skills, capacity, and savvy at the individual, organizational, and ecosystem levels. We will resource rest and staying power for those on the front lines and support learning and practice as it relates to bench building and succession planning. Finally, we know that one, if not the most valuable thing we can do to strengthen our movements is to be in relationship with one another, to have each other's back. We've heard loud and clear that our grantee partners want to be in strategic connection with one another. So this year, we'll be exploring Kataly's right role in this, whether it's resourcing grantees who wish to self-organize and convene themselves, or Kataly or one of our wonderful allies playing a convening role, or both. So stay tuned, there'll be much more to come. With that, I'll pass it to my beloved colleague, Kemi.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kemi Rolay. I'm the People and Culture Manager at Kataly. I use she, her pronouns. And it's funny, I remember last year watching the State of the Spend Out, so I am beyond thrilled to be here with you all on this side of things. And I have the opportunity today to share some of what is on the horizon for the foundation as Kataly is officially in the second half of our Spend Out. And so you just heard from our programmatic capacity building and grant management team. So I will briefly recap some of those points which were shared. So our mindfulness and healing justice will have their final grant making in 2026 and 2027 through a movement advised spend out strategy. And what that specifically looks like is working with leaders from across the mindfulness and healing justice ecosystems to provide advice, thought partnership, and grant making recommendations that builds and strengthens the long-term infrastructure for those ecosystems, ideally with less philanthropic dependence. For our Restorative Economies Fund, they will be making their final non-extractive capital investments in 2025 and the final grants in 2027. And one thing that I wanted to note is that 2025, this year, is the last year of the rough investments, and partially in order to provide enough spaciousness to have a community process for how those investments should be held and governed post-Kataly. And so the REF team really wants to lean into what does community governance mean ourselves. And so that's going to take a lot of planning, time, trust building, and work over the next few years. Our Environmental Justice Resourcing Collective, as you heard, will also make their final round of renewals for the span of 2026 through 2028. And as you just heard from Jocelyn, capacity building and other non-financial supports for grantee partners are actually ramping up. And again, that was specifically intentional by design in order to support grantees in strengthening their ability to sustain themselves after Kataly's gone, and also strengthen the critical movement infrastructure that our grantees depend on as well. For grants management, one thing we wanted to note was a deeper focus on our communications. So specifically ensuring that we are communicating clearly and intentionally as we disperse our final grants. And I also wanted to take this time to share a little bit about what our people in operations team is also thinking about as we move through spend out. So for us, we want to continue to deepen our radically people-centered strategies, liberatory practices, and transformative impact that's deeply in service of Kataly's mission. So we know that within the containers of an organization, our organizational infrastructure, our policies, processes, practices, political analysis, all of those things are really where the values and commitments that we speak out loud are embodied within the container of an organization. So for us, our intention is to continue to hold this area of work with a spirit of abundance, with rigor, with a commitment to continual learning and practice, and to be worker-centered as well. And these are very similar elements that we are looking at internally, and Jocelyn also mentioned will be a part of a lot of the work in capacity areas of capacity building as well. And we know, given this moment, that fortification in these areas is of particular importance as we bring Kataly to a close and to completion. Next slide, please. So some other areas of work where we'll be expanding that we wanted to share is around our impact and evaluation. So from the beginning, Kataly has always been engaged in an active practice of learning with our grantee partners to really help us begin to unearth answers to some of these questions that we're holding. So we're going to continue to bring that spirit to our evaluation and really trying to think of evaluation in non-traditional ways. And one of those key questions is who is evaluating who? How are we prioritizing having our grantee partners evaluate us as a funder rather than just the other way around? And also, how can the process of evaluation be in service of our grantee partners and actually facilitate deeper relationships? And we also think about evaluation in terms of how can our evaluation process really help us to inform the most salient opportunities for Kataly in our philanthropic advocacy and funder organizing. And you've heard this exemplified in some of what one of my team members just shared in the deep importance of storytelling. So we recognize how stories and narratives shape how we move through the world, who is deemed worthy or not, even how decisions are made. And so storytelling really undergirds the narrative shifts that are a necessity for the liberatory changes that we want to see in the world. So we're really holding that deeply as well. And thinking about how can we most effectively tell our story? How can we document our work and our learnings so that we're also capturing reflections from grantees and partners in our team in real time as the work is happening, as well as ensuring that we have the documentation and stories for others to be able to learn from after we are gone. And lastly, I wanted to name our philanthropic advocacy is a big part of our work in our remaining years. And again, this is where we're going to continue to expand our work in our final years. And we have done and will continue to do this work in close collaboration with many of our partners in philanthropy and in movements, many who have been organizing within philanthropy for a long time. And so we want to continue to advocate for foundations to approach their investment strategies with the same level of intentionality as their grant-making strategies, thinking through how do you divest from state-sanctioned violence and prioritize racial justice values in an investment strategy. We will continue to advocate that the how we are in this work is just as critical as the what, whether this is how we build relationship and trust in collaboration with grantees, or how we build liberatory practices and operations in order to fortify the infrastructures of our organizations. And in the midst of a lot of uncertainty, we want to continue to call in other funders to maintain and expand their funding for racial justice. As again, as you've heard multiple times, our North Star is really to ensure that Black people, Indigenous people, and all communities of color have the resources and agency to build power and share prosperity. So we see that as core to our advocacy and organizing moving forward. And lastly, I just wanted to close by sharing a little reflection in preparation for this session. I really was thinking about this moment that I'm in, that we're all in, and the fear and the uncertainty that can also color so much of this moment. But I'm also sitting with what's different about the moment. You know, I started saying that last year I was actually watching this, wishing that I was working at Kataly, and this year I am. And so I'm thinking about universe's beautiful timing that I get to be in this constellation of truly badass, beautiful folks who move with care and integrity and brilliance and curiosity. So just amidst all of the things that we're holding, um, extending just so much gratitude for the constellations and the formations that we find ourselves in, and all that I know will be possible for us. So thank you all for being in community with us. And now I will hand it back to Maka, who's going to talk a little bit about the challenges of the political moment and what being a spend out looks like right now for Kataly.
Thank you, Kemi. I will say, I think I speak for the team in saying that we are so thrilled to have you be a part of our team. So, yeah, we just want to take a moment to name the thing that is on everyone's mind. What does it mean for Kataly in the field of philanthropy to be doing this important work in this unique political moment? And so I want to take this as an opportunity to speak directly to my peers in philanthropy. I've seen some of you in the chat, and I'm so glad you're here. One of the things we recognize at Kataly is that the stoking of fear and panic that we're experiencing in this moment is manufactured chaos. And it's designed to put us in a stance of reactivity where we're moving from a place of our emotions, where we're moving in isolation as an attempt to preserve our own self-interest and preserve our own institutions. We believe that in this moment, what is actually needed is for us to all be grounded in our collective purpose, and that we know we will only get through this moment together. So I invite all of us to take a moment to feel the feelings, to understand where they're coming from, and to lift up the information that the feelings are providing us. But I also want us to be clear that we need to be able to move and act from a place of what is the future world that we want, and how do we want to live in that together. Like many of you, our team is watching the daily news. We are trying to discern from one moment to the next what is the best, most impactful course of action that we can take in this moment. And like we've seen time and time again, with various rapid response efforts that have occurred over the brief lifetime of our organization, we've remained clear that our mission is to center the needs and voices of Black and Indigenous and all communities of color, and recognize that this is most essential because these are the communities that are unfortunately hit first and worst when it comes to any crisis. And so to kind of move us out of the narrative and frame of the political chaos we're in, and to ground us in our collective purpose, I want to share a little story with you all. For many of you, I probably can assume that Harriet Tubman is a shero that inspires you. She's one that I look to time and time again. And one of the things that has always moved me about Harriet Tubman is a story about how when she was working to get so many enslaved people free, she literally looked up to the stars to help chart a pathway up and out of slavery. And so for us, we need to actually be able to lift up out of the chaos of the moment and be really focused in on our North Star. What are we trying to accomplish and do together? Now is a time for us to move from dreaming to doing, to actively build the future worlds that we want, to build the future worlds that we've been advocating for, and to recognize that it's each of us that has a role and responsibility to do that work now. And so many of us, what we're observing in the field of philanthropy right now is that we're starting to see an increase in foundations that are deciding to spend out. We think that this is great. We think that it's really exciting to see so many foundation leaders being intentional about flowing more capital and resources out into communities. And I want to invite us to be thoughtful about spending out with a purpose. I recently received an email from one of our grantees that had noted in 2024, roughly 20% of their funders had announced that they were spending out. And they didn't give the grantee a timeline. They didn't talk about what this would mean for their work. And this has left the organization in a moment of fear. If you are deciding to spend out your work, please do so in a way that centers the needs of the grantees. Being sure that you're not just redistributing your resources, but you're actually putting them in a position to be more powerful after you're done funding them than before your funding relationship started. When we don't do this, that's actually what ends up leaving a vacuum of leadership and a vacuum of resources. So please be sure to communicate early and often to your grantees. Please be sure to understand what support they might need from you as you're moving into being a spend out foundation. Be really clear about how you can flow capital to them with the flexibility that allows them to continue to implement their work beyond and outside of your unique relationship with them. For those of you that are interested in learning more about how to spend out with a purpose, I think we have some people from Justice Funders on the webinar. Maybe they can share this information in the chat box. Justice Funders is hosting a webinar on how to navigate the goo of spending out towards regeneration. It'll be on March 18th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Please use this as an opportunity to learn from others in the field about how they're also spending out with a purpose. I also want to invite us to recognize that we need to really think about our culture and how we move and our purpose in what we're doing over in any particular strategy. Now is not the time for philanthropy to be precious about our strategies when it comes at the expense of what grassroots organizations and communities need in the moment. Stand 10 toes down in your values and move with that conviction. And ensure that you have an organization that can be nimble and adaptive in order to adjust tactical responses that still allow you to move towards your strategy, but that don't come at the expense of organizations. So lean into your values, lean into your culture and your purpose, and be open about how strategies might need to shift in this moment in order to serve grantees. I also now think that now is in time for us to be clear about making well-informed, grounded assessments. Part of the stoking of panic and fear is to figure out how they can get us to be early adopters of some of the new policies that they're putting out. So take a moment to take the news in, but also be discerning and assess what are the actual material changes and what does this mean for our grantees and our communities on the ground. One of the things that we've observed just in the last year most recently was how the attacks on Fearless Fund was a pressure test to see if they could actually get foundations to become early adopters of some of their policies to step away from diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work. And so just 5 years after so many organizations and corporations and foundations committed more dollars and resources to support Black-led movement building work, just 5 years later, we're already seeing some of our colleagues in philanthropy pull back. We're in a privileged position given the resources of our sector. We need to leverage that privilege to be in service of protecting and supporting our grantees. So take in the information, but make and move from well-formed, grounded assessments. And lastly, I'm going to be honest, we need to be moving and doing all things on all fronts at all times. We need to be able to address the mitigation of harm while also building beyond. Rapid response has been a tool that, as much of a blunt edge as it is in philanthropy, we have found that for us at Kataly, it has allowed us to be nimble and deeply responsive to our grantees. When we take an intersectional approach to how we do rapid response funding, we come to see that many of the same organizations that we're resourcing through our 3 program areas are unfortunately those that are hit first and worst when we see new policies come down that are designed to hurt and harm Black and Brown communities. They're also the ones that are most directly impacted by climate disasters. So, want to invite us in philanthropy to think about how we can leverage rapid response as an opportunity to meet immediate needs, to mitigate harm, but to also then leverage it so that it can help us to have a just recovery. So it can help us to figure out how we ensure that we are putting these same communities and organizations on better footing following the crises than what they experienced going into it. So we need to be doing, once again, all the things. We need to be providing rapid response dollars on top of continuing to move multi-year general operating support dollars. We also need to be leaning into supporting the capital campaign projects because we know that these land-based projects are places of safety and sanctuary for so many communities. And we also need to be looking at our investment strategies to ensure that we are not investing in initiatives and organizations that in one realm are hurting our communities, and then we're providing grant-making dollars, putting the onus on these same communities to fight back and push against those corporations that are hurting them. We also want to invite our foundation peers to be thinking about the importance of safety and security. Last year was the first time Kataly decided to increase and do rapid response grant making that focused on providing safety and security and a broad understanding of those terms to our grantees. We recognize that this should be part of ongoing general operating support, ensuring that organizations have the flexible capital that they need to ensure their physical and digital safety, to be able to create mechanisms for community safety as well. So we are being called to task in philanthropy. We know that we support organizations and communities that are constantly navigating immediate needs, having to address things on all fronts at all times. And so we need to be able to do the same. We believe that this is the role of philanthropy in this moment, to be able to spend out with a purpose, to move capital at scale and swiftly, to really lean into our values and our culture, to make well-informed, grounded assessments that inform how we move, and to be able to support organizations in mitigating the harm their members are experiencing, while also ensuring they have the resources to build the future worlds that we all want and need. And so it's time to build, it's time to do, and it's time to get to work. So thank you all for joining us for our webinar. And now I want to hand it back to Erin, who's going to take us through our questions and answers section. This is an opportunity where we get to engage with all of you live about what is the work Kataly is doing and to answer any questions you may have for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Amaka. My video's not starting at the moment, but that's okay. So we're going to move into the Q&A portion now, and we're going to start with the questions that you all submitted when you registered for the webinar. If you have any additional questions, we invite you to add them to the Q&A section, and the Kataly team will respond. So first up, we have Lynn. Lynn, can you tell us how will Kataly support grassroots organizations under the new administration, given the potential targeting of our communities?
Thank you, Erin. Hello, everyone. My name is Lynn Hoy. I'm the Chief Investment Officer of the Kataly Foundation, and I use she, her pronouns. And this is a very big question and one we sit with every day at Kataly. Everyone at Kataly feels the urgency in having a clear answer to this question. And to what Amaka just shared, philanthropy has a responsibility to be grounded in our response to grantees and to not respond from a place of reactivity or from a place of thinking that we know best. We're grateful to many of you who have reached out to us to share what is needed in the immediate moment and suggestions on what we should consider in how we support grassroots organizations going forward. We know many of you are concerned about your land-based projects, your 501c3 status, being directly targeted, and losing funding. And we've seen that in the chat today. We want you to know, first and foremost, that we see you and we hear you and we stand in solidarity with you. For our existing grantees, our capacity building team sent out an email last week providing public-facing resources ranging from digital security to navigating organizational structures to provide some initial guidance on how our grantees can start to assess the increased threat environment. Our grantees can also access these resources on the capacity building website, and our team will continue to update this monthly going forward. But this is just a first step. We're working through what resources we can make available specifically for safety and security work. And we want to take an expansive approach to safety and security, which includes organizational safety and resilience, legal defense, and protection for vulnerable communities, amongst others. We're balancing the need and urgency of this moment with the very real reality that this type of work requires funding beyond a rapid response. It's really important that this work is informed by our community. So I'd invite everyone to reach out, all of our grantees to reach out to your engagement officer or any member of Kataly staff if you have specific feedback or specific requests. And finally, I want to make some commitments. We're committed to our mission and our values. You've heard that throughout the webinar today. We're committed to resourcing power building in Black, Indigenous, and all communities of color. We're committed to adjusting and responding where we can, as you all are adjusting and responding. We will not be deterred in this work. We see our work at Kataly as connected to a lineage of movement building, resistance, and joy. And now is our time to take what we learned from our elders and ancestors and build towards the future we are already envisioning. I'll hand it back to you, Erin, for more questions.
Thanks, Lynn. Next, we'll hear from Jolene Ruffin. Jolene, how do you see Kataly investing in your team's leadership more deeply in 2025?
Good morning, all, and thank you for this question. My name is Jolene Ruffin, she, her pronouns, and I am the Chief Financial and Operations Officer here at Kataly. So in 2025, we are deepening our investment in our team's leadership in several key ways. First, we are prioritizing full staffing with 18 staff positions, which should be our final configuration through spend out, making sure our team has the capacity to lead and do this work well, with a commitment to well-being remaining central to how we support our people. Second, leadership development continues to be a priority through our professional development program, which offers access to coaching, classes, and field-wide learning. We're also deepening our investment in political education and alignment, equipping our team with the tools to navigate our sector. And we are actively encouraging and funding leadership opportunities, supporting staff to attend conferences, speak publicly about our work, and step into leadership roles across the field. As we move through our spend out, we are designing a transition assistance program that will help staff exit their roles with dignity and intention. And lastly, in a moment where there are very public examples of workers being undervalued and mistreated, we are committed to creating a workplace where every person feels valued, empowered, and aligned with the work we do, while building a leadership pipeline for the field, making sure that the knowledge, the skills, and values cultivated within our organization extend beyond us, where leadership development is not just about individual growth, but about reshaping the conditions in which we all work. Thank you. I'll pass it back to you, Erin.
Thanks, Jolene. Kemi, can you tell us how will Kataly Foundation seed and cement its impact beyond the sunset date?
Thank you so much for the question, and I also invite any of my colleagues to post in the chat as well. one of the things I wanted to share is part of how we see our impact is something that Amaka spoke to. We recognize that we are decentering ourselves and as philanthropy, while also being clear and centered in how we leverage our power, opportunities, and relationship. And so I think that being in an organization that tries to hold those things simultaneously, there's a lot to be learned, a lot to be documented, that we also see being beneficial as we share out for our ecosystem, specifically those in philanthropy and also partners. There's a deep lessons learned from our grantees, investees, and partners. And so we also want to be thinking about how the capacity building within philanthropy, where there's a role for us to play in shepherding some of those lessons in how philanthropy can continue to evolve and transform. And, you know, there's something to be said around thinking about how we close, as several folks have talked about. And again, what is it that we've learned? How do we move in this formation as we are moving towards closure? And so how do we create the spaciousness for all of the things that may come up, whether that's fear, grief, excitement, longing for things to stay the same? And through that, we recognize that Kataly Foundation is one formation, but that the folks who make up the components of this formation will continue to extend and weave in our movements in really deep and meaningful ways. And lastly, we also know that the work is always growing and changing. And so we're deeply excited to be able to learn over the course of many years around how our work with our partners in the field has also created more change and transformation as well. Thank you so much for that question.
Thank you, Kemi. We have a couple of questions about applying for funding for Danielle. I'll give them to you kind of one at a time. So first, we have, what does your funding and grant making process include? And how do you identify what to invest in and what criteria is considered?
Thank you so much, Erin, for this question. And yeah, I think that this is a really big question that comes up quite a bit. So we've received a variety of questions around what types of organizations we fund and the kind of work that we support, as well as the more explicit question of, are we accepting new grantees, considering how close we are to spend out? So I'm going to zoom out and then try to get really specific about answering those things. So we have our 3 program areas, and each program area is funding organizations, doing specific work, whether that is with restorative economics, environmental justice, or mindfulness and healing justice. If you want more information about the organizations that we currently fund and really to kind of self-assess if your organization or your work is a good fit, then you can go ahead and visit our website to be able to get more information about that. Is katalyfoundation.org. And then with regard to whether we're accepting new grantees or proposals, we still do not have an open call kind of like proposal process. We really try to accept proposals by invitation, and we generally meet grantee partners through our current grantee ecosystem, movement advisors, and field research. And I can kind of zoom in a little bit more to talk about each of the different program areas with regard to where they're at. So the EJRC, the Environmental Justice Resourcing Collective, does not receive incoming requests, given our respect for upholding the movement-led grant-making process that the EJRC leaders have designed and also implemented. So the 9 women of color leaders who are not only advising but directing the funds for the environmental justice work that Kataly is doing really have, the full agency to be able to direct that body of work and the funding that goes in that way, and they have our full trust. For the Restorative Economies Fund, at this point in time, we spoke a little bit about grant making and also the investments work. So the Restorative Economies Fund is not accepting any new investees. And the grant making side of REF is really reviewing the gaps in their grant making portfolio, looking to identify grantees that fit those gaps. And then we will basically assess based on the grant making priorities. And what I will say too is that for the Mindfulness and Healing Justice program, that group has a limited amount of resources available for potential new grantee organizations in 2025 and is prioritizing recommendations coming from current Kataly grantee partners. So we suggest that, if you're interested in partnering with us, read up about our strategies, again, self-assess whether you're a good fit. And if you're reaching out to us, go ahead and send along, a little bit of information about the work that you do to allow the team to do research on your organization. This may feel like it needs to go without saying, but I will reiterate, it does not have to be brand new Kataly facing, information. This can be work that you've drawn up for another funder, a link to your website if that's got adequate information on what you do. And I will say too, lastly, that, as the foundation is approaching spend out, our primary focus really is going to be on effectively resourcing our network and ecosystem of grantee partners. So I hope that helps to shed a little bit of light and clarity on this question.
Thanks, Danielle. There's a second question here that I think you've touched on, but I'll pose it anyway in case there's anything you want to add or reiterate. And the question is, what avenues are available to potential grantees to give input into designing grant applications and RFPs?
This is a very good question. I would like to go ahead and clarify that, the Kataly Foundation doesn't operate under a grant application or RFP process. But I think that if potential grantee partners have feedback about how they are experiencing the foundation, we welcome it. So you can always reach out to us with a message at our general mailbox. That's info@kataly.org, info@kataly.org. We try to do our best to get to as many of the messages that come into our general mailbox as possible. But absolutely, if you have feedback, insights, things that you would like to share with us, we really want to hear from you. And it would be a pleasure to be in conversation about how you're experiencing us as a foundation and any thoughts or feedback that you have.
Thank you, Danielle. Next, Jocelyn. How does Kataly define success when working with grantee partners?
Thanks, Erin, for lifting up this question. So I think we would define our success with grantees based on the extent to which we are living into our values and the extent to which we are showing up well in our relational approach. Are we creating the conditions for mutual trust and transparency? Are we being responsive to requests for support from our grantees, especially when it involves action beyond grant making? Are we moving in ways that are additive and restorative rather than inadvertently replicating harmful or burdensome philanthropic practices? And we rely on various indicators to know if we are achieving success. For example, grantees feel comfortable sharing challenges or mistakes with us and asking for help. We are only asking for information and feedback that we intend to use in service of our grantees. Or we've connected a grantee with a new funder. So those are some of the things that we might look to assess and understand whether or not we're hitting that successful marker. Thank you.
Thanks, Jocelyn. And Donna, I have this question. We would love to know more about your funding for mindfulness and healing justice. What do you look for and what metrics matter to you?
Thank you so much for this question. I'm Donna Bransford. I'm the Senior Program Officer for the Mindfulness and Healing Justice Program. And we really look to support mindfulness and healing justice efforts that are led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color that are focused on collective healing and transformation, are accountable to community, and are in service of racial and economic justice. And so within that, we specifically provide grants to strengthen the infrastructure for BIPOC mindfulness and healing justice organizations and networks, to build a pipeline of movement-aligned practitioners, and to support land and spaces for collective healing and transformation. And that includes Indigenous land repatriation efforts as well. And so just related to metrics, I think a little bit of interesting what Jocelyn was just sharing, like I feel like we are specifically kind of interested within the organizations that I just named, right? And the practitioners we're supporting with looking at folks who have a clear racial justice analysis and a political analysis that acknowledges the systemic and root causes of the intergenerational trauma from which our communities are seeking to heal, right? But we've also been reading and thinking about a wonderful piece of research done by Tatiana Frazier that's called The Art of Scaling Deep. And so one of the things that she talks about is the real push from philanthropy that also comes from kind of corporate sector for organizations to scale up, so to influence policy work, to scale out, to spread themselves, their models across the country as the real markers for success. And we really want to ask ourselves, like, is that actually what we want to be using as a marker for success for our movements? Is bigger always better? Is a capitalist model of kind of constant growth what we want to be using as our base for determining what success looks like? And so one of the things within this scaling deep research that they talk about is defining scaling deep as the deep personal and broad cultural transformational work that's required to create durable and sustainable systems change. And that part of that includes a continual process of reflection, of renewal, and interconnected change that requires really slowing down and getting better at what one does instead of this idea that we have to kind of continue to grow exponentially. And so I would just like to offer that as a different way of thinking about metrics and evaluation. And we put that link to that report in the chat. So I hope folks might enjoy that. And I will hand it back to you, Erin.
Thanks, Donna. Thank you, all the panelists, for responding to these questions, and thank you to all the participants for sharing such thoughtful questions for the team to engage with. If you haven't yet checked out the Q&A, I definitely invite you to do so. The Kataly team has been responding to all the questions that folks have put forth as the webinar has moved forward. And now I'll turn it back over to Amaka to close us out with some final thoughts.
Wow, that was a great rapid fire of questions. I hope you all had a chance to read some of the responses in the question and answers box that our team has been responding to, as well as the chat box. This concludes our State of the Spend Out webinar for 2024. Thank you all for taking the time to come and listen and learn with us in this work. We're excited to be in deep community with you as we figure out how to navigate the year ahead and what's next for all of us. Your thoughtful questions really help to make this an engaging conversation and create some openings around how we can be in direct relationship with many of you, particularly our peers in philanthropy that are thinking through strategic ways to engage in philanthropic advocacy and funder organizing in service of our grantees. I'd like to thank the amazing Kataly team. Y'all, our staff is like, if we could come, I would give a big round of applause if this was in person. But we have a remarkable team that's committed to doing this work. We have also been greatly supported by an amazing group of consultants that support our program work, our different departments, and our foundation as a whole. And you heard shout outs to our gracious board of directors that has helped to make all of this possible. I also want to give a deep appreciation to Erin Malone and Amanda Cooper from Lightbox Collaborative that have stepped in to support us while Zainab is out on leave. We really appreciate you for supporting us in producing this event, and to Shake Technologies that has been providing some behind the scenes tech support to us. In the coming week or so, we will publish a blog that will share a recording as well as a summary of this webinar, and we'll continue to engage with some of the questions you all have raised, both through our Medium blog, but also through our LinkedIn page. So please do take a moment to share any last thoughts or comments in the chat box, and we'll continue to think through creative ways to be in direct relationship with all of you. Thank you so much, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.